Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Got a great webinar queued up here on zero-click searches. Give everyone another minute to join before we get started.
Oh, look at those numbers rack up, man. Congratulations. What's everybody's vaccination status? One or two in? Everybody? Yeah, both. Yeah.
Jansen,
Halfway.
one and done.
Yeah. Today actually it's funny. Today is my 2 shots plus 14, so I'm officially like all the way through it. So,
Congrats.
That's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
I go in May 12th.
I had this nice benefit of being a teacher as well, in addition to my day job. So they said, oh yeah. So UCLA called and said, we'll sign you up and we'll do this. And I go, awesome, I'll take it. So, and then my partner runs restaurants, so she's technically a front line as far as California is concerned, and they put her in as well.
Yeah. Sweet. All right. I think we got
lots of friends in the audience.
Yeah, the numbers starting to come in. So we'll go ahead and kick things off here. Over the last few weeks, zero-click searches have kind of resurfaced as something of a hot topic in the SEO space. So we're really excited today to address those questions and concerns, things we've been hearing with our expert panel here. Just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Ryan Weber. I'm the Director of Client Success here at Rio SEO. I'll be moderating today's discussion. Joining me are Jeff Ferguson, Head of Production at Amplitude Digital, Jeff Coyle, Co-founder and Chief Strategy Officer for MarketMuse, and Noah Lerner, Product Director at 2 Octobers. How's it going, guys? I know we were chatting briefly on vaccine status there. You guys want to give a quick intro and background about yourselves?
Let's go Alpha. Go ahead, Jeff.
All right, I'll start. I'm Jeff Coyle. I'm the co-founder, Chief Strategy Officer for MarketMuse. MarketMuse sets the standard for content quality and directs content strategy. We have our own metric for personalized difficulty that tells you how much content you need to create and how hard it's going to be for you to rank. My background, I've been in this space for 22 years on May 1st, as scary as that sounds. It's really great to see a lot of familiar faces in the attendees group. Cheers.
So I'll go next. My name is Jeff Ferguson. I'm a partner and head of production at Amplitude Digital. We're a full-service digital media agency out of Los Angeles. It's been around for about 12 years at this point. I've been in this business a little bit over 25 years at this point, so I guess I'm the old man of the group. I spent the first 15 years on the client side of things, running up head of digital for companies like Kimberly-Clark, Hilton Hotels, and even Napster, if you remember that name. But
wow,
yeah, but,
wow, that's sick.
Yeah, I'm also an adjunct professor at UCLA, and in their business program, and I like to make cocktails on the weekends.
That's awesome. My name is Noah Lerner. I'm the product director at 2 Octobers. We're a B Corp digital marketing agency located in Denver. In my day job, I do SEO, build marketing flywheels for organizations, and also build really interesting SEO tools for other agencies and organizations. Super stoked to be here. It's great to see so many friends in the audience.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And again, thank you for being here with us today. A few housekeeping items before we dive into the subject at hand. So the audience is on mute, but we do welcome your questions throughout the webinar. You can send those in through the Q&A button on the control panel in Zoom. We'll answer as many as we can live, but if we don't have time live on the webinar, we'll definitely follow up with you directly afterwards. You can also follow along with the conversation today on Twitter. We'll be live tweeting throughout the webinar at Rio_SEO and using the hashtag RioWebinar. And then finally, we are recording the webinar today. So we'll be sending a link to that recording to all attendees. So be on the lookout for a follow-up email from our marketing team after the webinar. All right, so to dive into it, I thought to start, let's take first, a closer look at the data, right? So what we're actually talking about here. obviously the second Sparktoro report that Rand has published looking at this zero-click search trend, right? This time around, he's using data from SimilarWeb, looking at 5 trillion clicks throughout 2020. Rand found that 77% of searches on mobile and 47% of searches on desktop resulted in a zero-click search. I think to start, maybe Jeff Ferguson, we'll start with you. Just kind of maybe summing up, what do we think Rand is trying to say here before we get into the validity of the data and some of the details? What do we think his point is, or what's his initial stance, I guess, with the report?
Absolutely. So, I mean, so I think Rand has got like a valid point that he's trying to make on this one. I don't want to discredit him for that. I think really what he's trying to get to is the point that obviously, Google is building itself a nice little walled garden here, and those walls are getting higher. There are moments here where, they're obviously dipping into other industries that were better served by other more specialized search engines like travel and tickets and things like that. And so that stuff's probably there. And obviously there's a genuine concern that there's certain monopolistic practices that are coming out of Google that should be noticed, I guess is the best way to put it. And again, I'm not going to deny him that. I just think at this point, the data that we're looking at really doesn't help prove that point very much, because it's the way it's constructed and where the data is coming from and things like that. It's just not there yet.
And Jeff Coyle, do you want to talk a little bit more about that piece, I guess, the source of the data and where we think the gaps are, I guess, in Rand's conclusions versus what we can actually discern?
I think that's something we're definitely going to get into. And the question is, a walled garden is a very, very different outcome than having a successful search experience and feeling good about the outcome. I mean, there's two completely different scenarios. And when I think one thing I do want to also mention is what I think to be the most notable thing that I'd like to hear Jeff and Noah's perspective on is this is one of the first times that a data study provided by a third party received a formal response from Google. So they actually published detailed, kind of almost a line by line rebuttal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's extremely unique. I mean, that rarely has happened over the past 2 decades with them. And clicking on an ad is an outcome. Not clicking at all is a zero-click search. Not clicking on one of the N blue links, clicking on a SERP feature, search engine results page feature, versus staying within the walled garden. When you can reframe that as saying, staying within the walled garden within a Google entity, or doing a research or a search change, which would include filtering, or changing your intent to be more explicit if you did not appreciate the search. So, one of Google's big boogeymen internally is providing a result that people don't like, and they leave Google, right? Then you get researches, right? People clarifying their search in one way or another, refiltering. When you're looking at data that's this general or coming from a third-party sampling-based provider, which has, is another topic of conversation, is to say, like, if you take a percentage and go N searches versus N clicks on the N blue links, is that really a valuable, actionable piece of data, or is it just sensational?
Very valid point.
Yeah, great.
Oh,
Great
what do you
point.
guys think of? I mean, the way I read both articles again this morning that Rand wrote, and I read the Google response again, and my big kind of takeaways were Google's a monopoly, and they're leveraging that to restrict organic traffic more and more over time. What about the monopoly piece? Like, do we all agree that there is a monopoly in search?
Here's my thing with monopoly, right? So the classic definition of monopoly that the United States uses, that, you know, the thing where, you know, will get you, you know, attention from the Department of Justice and things like that, is that they, you know, it means that a company is, you know, completely owns the marketplace for which they serve, and that they're basically doing things that are keeping other people from entering into that marketplace in one way, and that's the kind of the weaker part of this one. So if you look at it from those angles, Google isn't a monopoly, right? Because there's clearly other players in the search space. When it comes to the advertising market, Google doesn't own all of the advertising market. They're not even close with all the advertising market, even on the internet. They're just a chunk of it when it comes to this type. So those classic old rules aren't going to work when it comes to actually trying to define it as a monopoly. So in reality, what's going to need to happen is if somebody wants to chase Google down for being a monopoly and break them up, and this goes for not just Google, but also Facebook and some of the other big players that have come out of this one, is that they're going to have to redefine those rules for the modern era and basically look at it from the standpoint of, like, are there practices that are happening here that are, I guess, scaring the crap out of anybody from actually even trying to compete against these guys, right? So that's the real concern. And if it's based on that, they might have an argument there, because there certainly are things to where it just looks futile as a way to actually compete with these ones. But for the most part, you know, when it comes just a matter of like, hey, are they the only ones there, and are they going out and destroying anybody that tries to go up against them? That's not happening, and that's just kind of capitalism. So it's really hard to go after people for that kind of stuff in this country. You really have to prove that well, and which is why you know, the current DOJ case against Google and stuff like that, it's going to take years, and it's probably not going to work, right? They're going to have to come up with brand new things to actually go after these guys about, and it's not there yet. But and studies like this are getting quote. Both studies have been, you know, kind of the first one got pulled in front of Congress at some point and used as a quote, and which is sad because it was just so inaccurate. but it's you know, it's you know, they're certainly going to improve that point, and you know, it may finally get Google to reveal certain percentages that we'd love to see on these things, you know, like the percentage of actual no-click searches that are due to, you know, them having competing products in their own service. Like, that's the number we're trying to get to. It's certainly not 50 to 60%, you know, the one that Rand's actually been stating over the years here, just through a variety of different functions to it. I mean, we know where those numbers come from. I mean, it's one of the things where, you know, if you just look at the data, both from the first study and from the similar web study, you know, there's a hardcore availability bias going on there, to where you've got data that was collected not for this purpose, right? It was really pulled in for an entirely different purpose. The first one was, you know, VAST was pulling in it for their virus checker kind of thing, and it was just an entirely different thing that people didn't know what they're going for. And Similar Web gets their stuff from a variety of different places, and it's a big black box that we actually don't know what it is. And while they, you know, Similar Web will tell you that they get a certain amount of their data from Google Analytics, right? They actually, you know, we know that the Google Analytics part doesn't even have anything to do with Google, right? Like they know they're not tapping into Google's Google Analytics account. So we know that's not where this data is. So that's the least, you know, effective part of it. Then there's all kinds of other just blind spots in this data that we've and the biggest one, like Rand actually admitted after the fact, after the first study, but it didn't come out the first one, and everybody kind of didn't go back and look at it later. But, you know, he basically came back, and this is actually a quote where he said, you know, that 50% originally they came up with includes searches that are answered by the results, which are basically featured snippets, right? But also searches that end because the user was frustrated and couldn't find an answer, which happens all the time, right? Searches that end because something interrupted the searcher, or any other reason for cessation of activity after the query would count as a zero-click search, right? And this could mean a variety of different things that they doesn't even cover. But so there's problems with collecting mobile data. You actually can't find people that are clicking on maps, like don't count as a click, even though it's internal. And that's something that was supposed to happen. There's some instances where if they click over to an app, that doesn't get counted as a click, even though it was clearly a click, right? So there's these big gaps in this stuff. And even if you look at it from like a featured snippet standpoint, we know that 12 to 15% of searches include a featured snippet. That's just modern data that's come out from a variety of different sources at this point. And even if you put that entire 12 to 15% into that, you know, the 50 to 60% that Rand is claiming to it, I mean, you've still got, you know, somewhere between 30 to 40% of stuff that are zero-click searches, but we don't know what percentage of that percentage, or actually things where Google is actually taking things away from somebody else, right? They could just be frustrated users. It could be the map people. It could be the app people. It could be all the stuff that we just don't know. So the data itself is just highly flawed and really doesn't prove the point on this thing. So it's so we're kind of left in this idea of look, we know they exist. We know there's a certain percentage of them that are featured snippets that we can deal with. We know there's another percentage of them that, really is Google that maybe, just taking people to like book a hotel room or book a flight or something along those lines, but we just don't know what it is. So, but this is why we need to stop using this 50 to 60% number of like 0-click searches, because it just isn't accurate. It isn't a fair portrayal of what's going on for what Google is. And the problem with it is that if Google really is doing some monopolistic type of activities, this actually just screws that up. It screws the entire argument up because we're using bad data to start with, right? If we had great data to do it, then we could actually go before and say, hey, look, we discovered this and it's like 10 to 15%, or it's this, whatever it is, but we just don't have that number. And so it makes it hard to have a proper argument about like how much damage 0-click searches are really doing.
Yeah, I mean, if they just asked, people who have been studying these things for quite some time, what are the questions that you actually want to know that would allow you to do the right research study for us? Then, people who, look at these things, like Jeff or Rand or me, we could actually build these lists of questions that ask, because when they come back and respond and say, some people do this and some people do that and some people this, and they're not accounted for here. So don't get misled by that other number. Well, can you answer those questions? How many of these actions are, fails? Can we group them in other ways so we can see how many of them were, mobile, right? For example, and how many of them were mobile to map, sequences? And can you give us that next tier of data, or at least, a little bit more of rope to hang ourselves with in this situation? Because it's one of these situations where it's like, no, you're not thinking of these other scenarios. Okay, well, help us to think about these scenarios and give us a little bit more data, so that we don't just think it's a monopolistic commercial entity intrusion. Or commercial intrusion would be the search result and the user is clicking on something that yields commercial value to Google, or explicitly direct commercial value, clicking on the ad, clicking on ads inside a map pack, clicking on something that is a Google-owned entity. A separation of that versus failed searches versus 10 blue link searches versus Google My Business clicks versus knowledge graph clicks. All of that information is what we truly would need to get to this. And then you have to do it at the topic level. And then, gosh, if you could do it at the, the intent fracture level. So how explicit was the intent on the query versus very general queries? If we had the ability to ask those questions and actually get them answered, then a number could be received. But for now, we're just basically like unraveling.
So let's forget about having great numbers or accurate data. When we talk data, Jeff, we talk all the time about being okay with directional data. Mm-hmm. And let's get away from the 50.9% number or whatever number. Does it feel directionally accurate to say that there's less organic traffic than there used to be?
I don't think
so.
Yeah, I would say no. Yeah, I know that was Google's official response to this, was saying that they're sending more organic traffic than they ever have, and you can take that as a corporate response. It's like we don't all have to bow down to that answer just because they said it. But it's one of the things where, at the very least, it was an answer out of Google. I know a few people said, well, it's not enough. We want more. I said, well, you can want more all you want. It's not the way this works. But they don't have to tell us anything about this stuff. But in general, I know many people have occasionally like to come out and say, like, well, the results just aren't as good anymore. I'm just not finding the data, whatever it is. I actually think the results are the best I've seen. And like I said, I've been looking at this for as long as it's existed for whatever. There's things I can find now in Google that I swear I've been trying to find for years. I mean, the weird things like all I've got is a snippet of a song lyric in my head and I haven't been able to find it. But in the last 2 or 3 years, it's right there, with just a thing. And that could just be, be obviously because the content is finally there, or it's just that Google is better at finding that content now. But I think what we're seeing now is we're getting in a real golden age as far as results go. I think the problem is though is that because we live in this capitalistic world or whatever it is, Google is looking at certain competitors out there, whether it be like Expedia, whether it be movie ticket sites, whatever it is, kind of staying saying like, hey, look, if we're a search engine, let's be a search engine, and we can do it all these other places, and then grabbing that piece of the pie. It's hard to say whether or not that's really evil, or if that's just capitalism, which some people will say is evil anyway, right? But it's I really don't feel like we're losing anything from that piece. And if we're talking about like featured snippets, which is the thing that most people do, is I've written other articles where I've talked about how it's not really stealing if you give permission to do it in the first place, and
right, terms of service.
Yeah, and most of the people that have kind of like suffered from the lost click when it comes to featured snippet probably didn't deserve it in the first place. Jeff and I both have jokes about like what this, what it is. Mine's always kind of like people asking like what date Easter falls on this year. I think, Jeff's is based on state capitals and stuff like that. And there was a whole cottage industry that made money off ad impressions for, generating crap pages that had this stuff. It was just there. And if that's going away, well, I'm sorry, like that, you can sit over there with the rest of the flashlight apps that used to be on iPhones, right? Like it's just kind of the way the system works these days. If you develop something that can go away that quickly with a wave of a coder's pen, then you probably had a feature and not an actual product.
Yeah, I think that with the intent, the intent on a search result, if it is mixed, if Google's favorite intent, what they're showing us is different. If amongst the results they haven't quite figured out exactly what somebody might want, that's a true kind of searcher experience. But if it's explicit and it's extremely simple, so it's informational and simple, well, showing the answer is what they're choosing to do. Where I think the argument comes up is where it's not simple and it is subject to interpretation on what the favorite intent should be. And when a featured snippet appears in that case, it looks like an award versus an answer. And when that featured snippet is an award, that's when a debate can occur. Because why would they get that reward? And when a featured snippet brings data in from multiple sources, like we're seeing right now in medical queries, where there's like a snippet from a Mayo Clinic page, but then it says symptoms, and there's 3 symptoms for that ailment, and those did not come from the Mayo Clinic page. That's when it starts to become a little suspect. Is like, why are you awarding this query that has ambiguous intent? Sometimes not even just intent, it has ambiguous meaning. Like there's a one article about one thing, one article about another. Why are you rewarding that with a feature snippet? How is that providing additional value? Isn't that just kind of ending a search experience that might not deserve to be ended now? And I think that's where you get into the void of unfair versus fair that some people are feeling. And I think there's a big difference then with seeing Bismarck when I type in what's the capital of North Dakota. That's my example, Jeff. But yeah, that's where I think the noise is coming. Is where you see something that isn't yet, it's not cut and dry, but the response you're getting is cut and dry, and that's just Google trying to solve the problem live with us as the test panel.
What do you think of the impact of us all becoming better at searching? Like this whole concept of search is new for the human race. Like learning to think in terms of entities when we put in search terms. I pretty much only throw in nouns now. You know what I mean? It's like noun gets me an entity-based answer, And also I think about things like, I really like film. And oftentimes I'll find myself and like, how tall is actor so-and-so? And then if I back out the answer, the question, and I start to ask again, it'll autocomplete actors that have acted with the first actor. And I find that that's pretty fascinating. And I also feel like that's okay. Like, I feel like that's meeting my intent. And I'll just put my phone down and continue watching the movie or something like that. And these types of data and numbers, they don't really account for that behavior, which I think is more prominent, but it's also logically invalid to project from the individual out, like to say that my experience is normal, but that's where I'm drawing my analogies from.
Sure. I mean, it's all very interesting in that sense that I think we've got a certain bias built into us because it's our job to actually try and get organic search results to appear and get clicked on and things like that. And so we kind of take it personal when it comes to how these results actually happen and whether or not we're losing traffic from it and things like that. But in reality, Google's doing its job. Its job as a search engine is to provide answers in one way or the other. And if it can do it directly, that's fantastic. If it can do it through by way of sending people to different websites and things like that, that's fantastic as well. But as you mentioned, search is evolving, just how it even works. I mean, we're all getting better at it. It's changed up from people typing in 1 or 2 words and clumsily kind of pounding through things to whatever it is, to where now we're in a world where full sentences are getting entered, and or people are searching through voice, which is another thing, by the way, that is included in the no-click type of area. So I mean, it's like this is a growing thing to it. It's all evolving from eyes, and you can watch your parents do it now, and they've mastered it. There's not a moment you see kids use it. That's the one that's really inspiring, because they just know how to do this stuff. They know how to work it. It's all changing before our eyes, and it's really delightful in that way. But I think one of the reasons we're probably getting ticked off a little bit on this one is because of that evolution. We're kind of feeling like we're getting left behind because our blue links aren't as important as they used to be back in the early days of search. And that's just change, right? That's just the way this stuff kind of happens. And either we have to roll with it and figure out new ways to get that information up top, or we fade away and murmur to ourselves that things aren't there used to be.
So on that topic, I mean, I think the key point there, right, is that you don't need a click to deliver value to the searcher, right? How are you guys advising brands to respond to this? Are you suggesting any changes as we talk about search evolving? Or I guess, what are the recommendations? And also then what are some of the metrics that you're looking at if traffic isn't the end all be all? How are you guys measuring, I guess, effectiveness of your organic strategies?
Revenue.
Yeah, it always kind of comes back to that. But I mean, there's
Sorry.
but
The right answer.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount of things that have to do with classic engagement. It really depends on where the content you've created lives in the consumer journey. When it comes to this stuff, there's plenty of stuff to where like the revenue is not going to happen that moment. It's just the start of the conversation. And that, frankly, I think is where a lot of these zero-click searches really are the ones that where they're showing up as featured snippets, where you're really, they're the top dog, you're featured, your brand is right up there, and it's the biggest it's ever been. And those ones we're encouraging clients to actually do. We're actually teaching them how to like rework content in a way that could become a featured snippet, because it's almost like a new ad. It's glorious. It's up there. It looks fantastic, and the name is very obvious, and it gets the job done. And as long as that search was a very top of funnel type activity where we weren't necessarily expecting any revenue to come in that moment, it's fantastic. It did its job, right? And we are having obviously some issues on how we properly track that and how we look at it, whatever it is, because we've looked at other metrics where we may look at search impressions, we may look at click-through rate and things like that. And usually, if we see really low click-through rates with something, our gut reaction was like, oh, we need to rewrite these titles and meta descriptions to make sure that it works. But we've been over the last couple of years leaning a little bit more into the idea of like, okay, let's really look at where that piece of content lives in the consumer journey. And if that's if a low click-through rate was expected because it was top of funnel and because it lives elsewhere, then we kind of say it's probably doing all right. It's sad that not as many people may like click through this, but we've actually seen that click-through rate be fairly well. If it's one of the things where we've had people that do recipes, we've had other types of content. I know my own content, there's been several things that I've written for Search Engine Journal that have become featured snippets on certain things. My recent article on web pages, not websites, became a featured snippet almost like overnight, which was kind of nice. But and I was very happy and proud of that stuff. I took screenshots. I showed it around like it was a new baby. It was something that I think has actually got a really strong purpose in the world, and we know it got a click-through world because it was the answer to this thing was just a teaser. It just drew more people into it, so it's not necessarily like a bad thing in that sense. So we help them out as much as we can.
Yeah, I mean, for what customer journey, buyer journey, making sure you have content that covers the entire pool of intents and the buyer journey, but also creating content for people at different phases of understanding at each of stage of those journeys. That multi-dimensional, matrix is what we advise. I mean, so you have to know, do you have great coverage at the early stage awareness part for expert and non-expert? Do you have middle of the funnel? Do you have late stage? Do you have post-purchase troubleshooting? Do you have, champion development content? You've got to be building content throughout that journey for the audiences that you target. And if you have pages appearing in organic search that do not satisfy the intent of the query, you've got to suss those things out and make a decision of whether you're going to fix it, update it, or create new to support it. And that's an ongoing thing. And that's good for business. I mean, that's good for all of us, because you've got to look and say, I'm ranking with a page that is a terrible user experience once someone clicks on it. Or I got to fix that. How do I fix that, right? Or I'm ranking amongst other intents that do other stuff. Do I solve those intents, or are those not relevant to my business? That's the strategy of SERP analysis now. And it's like kind of natural language analysis. So we have to get better. And in the end, if we service that intent, we have to build the content to show them that we know them, show that we have that expertise. So that's the advice. If we try to manipulate that in an unnatural way, we're going to get caught down the road. You really can't do that. I mean, and you aren't the place to find, Boston Terrier puppies, even though you've got the most wonderful cluster of content about Boston Terriers. You aren't the location to go buy one. You aren't that breeder. And if you try to represent yourself as that, it's going to be a problem. So you have to let some particular intents go, and you got to focus on other ones as part of that journey. And those are the people that are winning right now.
As you were talking, my mind went straight to barriers to entry and how much budget is necessary to produce that content, and what types of businesses, what kind of scale do they need to be in order to do it? And are they going straight for and if you're not meeting those requirements, are you only playing with super niche long tail?
I mean, you might be, but you've got to create the content that illustrates that you have the expertise across the buy cycle to even get that long tail to perform. In many cases, niching down by itself is a short-term winning strategy. And I think that, tracking it back to the zero-click search, you may need to create content that ranks on zero-click search results pages. It may just be part of the thing that you have to have in order to perform for those, those other terms. And so I think it's misguided to look at a search result that has no blue link clicks and not think that you should compete on that.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff, you bring up a great point about this idea is like, if you've ever done the research around search intent, as you said, hey, I want to fight in this space to whatever, the zero-click searches aren't necessarily the only thing that's holding you back. There's been plenty of times where, we've got multiple clients that actually are in the beautician space. They actually do beauty schools or whatever it is. And when you actually try and fight that battle, whatever it is, most of the top links for those things are actually people like Yelp and other top 10 type of sites or things or whatever that are fighting it. And you're not going to win that battle, right? That's not when you're going to be able to fight with just a new piece of content. So that's where we end up advising the clients. It goes, great, look, you're not going to write enough content to fix this thing. However, let's make sure that you show up on Yelp properly. Let's make sure you show up in these things, right? Because there's more to like search than just getting a blue link. There's ways of making sure that you take, effect of all the different types of search engines and whether or not they be specialties or not. But it's like, that's something we should all be used to at this point. And, that's not Google's fault. That's just the way that results work, right? So.
I mean,
Just reminded. Oh, sorry, go, Jeff.
No, I was just going to say that the questions that I want answered, right? It leads me to what Noah, you kind of said is it only about niching down? Well, if we had an answer of kind of diversity of ownership amongst the clicks that did happen, well, then you can make that business decision. So if I knew, for example, that one major entity had 4, real estate slots in this keyword result, and maybe all, like, I built my clusters of topics, I built a term pool, and I look and they've got 47% of the real estate, this one entity that owns 600 websites, and they have this ad sequencing, and they also have the right rail here. If I can do that analysis, and that's analysis that I do actively for my clients, right? I build those term pools and I try to identify, and I'll say, they've got 47% of the concepts and the real estate covered. So that's what you're up against. You're not up against, you're in position 9 and they're in position 4. And as that becomes, it's consolidation. As publishers are able to, instead of buying more ads, they buy more websites, then Google's going to have to change again, get used to it. The top 8 results, if they're all owned by one private equity firm, or if they're all owned by one conglomerate.
Oh, if they're all different Hearst properties, you mean?
Yeah.
You're saying examples, but
Yeah.
I'm not naming any names. Trust me.
Your lips to Google's ears, man.
But you are, that is going to be, they're going to have to change. And that's the one that's going to be painful for them, not responding to research studies. That one is. And that one has to come in the next year or 18 months, or else it's going to be easy to, the thing that they're trying to avoid is being able to be manipulated. And if there's enough money out there to buy all the real estate, it's like uber high level SEO, or like a big, huge chessboard where you can buy all the pieces. And that's the 0-click search that I'm worried about, because there's lots of clicks. You just can't get them.
So I'm hearing conglomerates as the larger risk, rather than Google turning knobs and adding SERP features.
Right. I mean, because there's SERP features.
Keep your eyes on the prize, people.
Yeah, keep your eyes on the prize. Totally. Yeah.
So I want to make sure we get a few of our audience questions answered here. We're getting a little short on time. First one, really quickly, Jeff, where can we find that awesome metadata t-shirt?
No, it's funny. This was, I'm not sure if they still have it, but it was Search Engine Journal did this shirt, and it was available in their store for a long time. But they do limited runs of things. So I'm not sure it's still there, but I know I snatched it up as soon as it came out.
Love it. Next one, all right, going back a little bit to the monopoly question. What incentives do users have currently for switching search engines? I mean, do you think that this trend of 0-click searches is a leading indicator that folks might be open to moving away from Google, or is Google still the best source of all information that we're going to keep coming back to it?
I mean, I still say they're the best source of it. I mean, your only real other options out these days are obviously your Bing or maybe DuckDuckGo, and DuckDuckGo is really just an amalgamation of variety of sources that is really kind of leaning more on the privacy tip, which is fine, I guess. If that's a concern of yours, it's a good way to do it. They're certainly not going to win this war totally based on the privacy thing. They have to be give privacy and give better, superior results in order to win this thing against Google. And they're not going to do that by using data that they're pulling from SERPs that they're pulling from Yahoo and a bunch of other places. So it's just not going to be the way this is going to work. But they don't have much incentive, like as far as consumers go. I mean, that's a good point on the monopolistic side of things. And just because nobody's come up with a better mousetrap. And that's the, the sad point about this, good old American capitalism, or it's the idea that it's sometimes you get marked down as being monopolistic just because other people just haven't done better at it yet, and that's sad, but it's just the way it works, right? And so I don't see any real reason why anybody would jump ship at this point. But
I think embedded, the embedded understanding, the embedded start point versus, and then also vertical search in its many forms, are actually the things that Google has shot for, right? So, I mean, YouTube, great example. A lot of search activity happens on YouTube. They own YouTube, right? A lot of ad misclicks occur on YouTube, right? It's a number one source of misclick for ads in advertising universally, and they own that. But it's, that's a different story than this guy, right? Which is the next big search engine, right?
Mhm.
Which is the only way to get access to somebody without it being them changing search engine providers is to be a particular type of fruit that we all have in our pocket, and or something else similarly. It would have to be something like that. The type here to search on the bottom of my Windows 10, but even that's not enough to make me change, right? And that's really, those are the types of experiences that would be needed. It would be something that is truly best as well as embedded. Good luck, getting people to change behavior at that scale. It'd be tough.
Yeah, I mean, I almost wish Apple would go ahead and come out with a search engine. I'd love to see what it looks like. Yeah,
there's rumors, right?
Yeah, it's been rumored forever, but I'd love to see what it looks like. It's going to be gorgeous to look at. I know that much. I don't know if it's going to work any better, but it's like, it's at the very least it'll be a lot more sexy than what we're seeing at Google these days. But but they got some smart people over there, and they do need competition from outside sources. I don't know if that competition coming from another monopoly in the country is going to be to do whatever, but it's at least it's something else to look at and try and things like that. But
what about Neva, right? Subscription-based search engine as opposed to ad-supported. Does that have legs?
Maybe. I think the world is still getting used to that idea. I mean, it's funny as a planet, I guess we love to complain about advertising, but we also hate to pay for things. And so like we're always going to be in this weird place to where people will, I mean, look at what's happening now when it comes to advertisement. Like display ads are powering most of the news and most of everything that we look at these days. And and when news companies come back and say, hey, look, here's an option, is that you can actually pay for a subscription, you see fewer ads, and it pays for better quality reporting and things like that. And what do people do is they look at a way to hack it or get around it or whatever it is. They'd rather use an ad blocker or something like that to basically steal content from something. I mean, that's not the way to do it. So if given the option for a subscription for something, that that ends up looking very elitist in the United States for some reason, because people only the rich people would afford to pay for their own private search engine and things like that. So I don't know if that's necessarily got the legs.
Well, I mean, Google Search Appliance is a was, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason why it was a was.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And also, I built two vertical search platforms. One was focus crawler based, where it was, it would try to look for content on one topic and build an index on that, and that's a potential in specific industries still. But it's also, it's a lot of work. And is the juice worth the squeeze for that type of experience? Is it that much better than using Google? And that's a really tough business to sell right now. And I mean, that's really tough. And you would have to basically build something that could make that part of justification. And like Jeff mentioned, I mean, the ads versus no ads. I mean, is it that much of a positive experience versus the overhead required to actually deliver a wonderful experience? And I think if you think that's an interesting concept, I think looking at the entire history, documentation, and product path of the GSA, the Google Search Appliance, is an interesting effort in research that you should do and think about, wow, will this ever happen? And
yeah, I mean, I think so. It's funny. I think the Google killer is whatever that ends up looking like. It's not going to look like what Google looks like right now, right? Because I think it's the next step, and we just don't know what that is yet. And I think that's the thing that'll finally knock Google down. And it could be 5 years away, it could be 10 years away. I mean, it's something, but it'll be like a drastic change in the way that we look for things and how we search for things and how we find answers, whatever it is. And that might be tied to the Internet of Things. It might be something new that we just haven't seen yet. But that might be finally the thing that does it. And who knows, by then Google may be all about rocket ships. I mean, they may not care by that point, or they may be the ones that invent it, but it's at this point I think, somebody else coming along with another product that looks just like Google in one way or the other, maybe it just has a different color scheme and so it claims they have a different algorithm or that it's private, whatever. That's not going to do it. Like I goes, I think the next big step that knocks them down is something we just don't even know what it looks like yet.
Wait a minute. That was critically important. And I just want to rest on that for a second. So are you saying that gizoogle.net isn't going to overtake Google?
No, yeah, exactly. That's
Have you guys actually been to gizoogle.net? Where all the SERPs are delivered as if Snoop Dogg wrote them? Have you guys been to it? It's amazing.
Branded search. No, I missed that one, but that's fantastic.
Yeah, check it out. Gizoogle.net.
I love
Hey,
it.
hey, baby. Hey, baby.
Glad I could
on
add some
that note,
levity.
yeah, I feel like that's a great way to close it down. I know we're at time, and we covered a lot of ground today. I know there are a couple questions we didn't quite get to answer live, so we'll be following up on those. Also, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us at marketing@rioseo.com. Want to thank both Jeffs and Noah for the time and the insights today. Before we sign off, do you guys want to maybe let the audience know how they can reach you? Twitter, email, websites?
Yes, Jeff at marketmuse.com, Jeffrey_Coyle on Twitter, LinkedIn. I respond to everything. I'd give you my cell phone if I could. I'm also a lot of times on Clubhouse talking to someone else who's on this panel about random stuff or about SEO and about content or about, something else. So if you have any questions, if you know anything about, the three people on this panel, the one thing to know is we're all so passionate about this. If you've got any questions, we've got an answer for you.
So yeah, so you can get me at jeff@amplitudedigital.com as an email. Feel free to reach me on. I'm obviously on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you. And then I'm Count Zero with an X, COUNTXERO, on just about everything, Twitter included. But love to get the questions on Twitter and everything like that.
I'm Noah at 2Octobers, which is spelled out Noah at 2Octobers.com. My Twitter's Noah Learner, and that's LEARNER. And on Clubhouse, I'm there all the time and would love to connect with you there. I just absolutely love chatting with folks. So please, please, please. Caroline, DM me on Twitter. I'll help you out.
Love it. Yeah, a lot of great discussions happening over on Clubhouse lately. So awesome. Thank you again for the time today. It was a pleasure to moderate the discussion. And to the attendees, we hope to see you all again on an upcoming webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Super fun. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you.